You know, in the world we live in today, that line between something you love doing and something you kinda can't stop doing, it gets really, really blurry. That one more game that turns into 3 hours, the endless scroll on your phone, that twitch you get to check a notification the second it pops up, we all know what that feels like. But what happens when those things stop feeling like a choice and start to feel more like a command? And that's really the big question we're tackling here. We're going to dig into the science behind what we call behavioral addictions. We're going to move past all the cliches about willpower to really understand what is physically happening inside your brain when a habit turns into a compulsion. And, most importantly, we're going to look at how the brain can actually heal itself. So let's get into the science of what makes these behaviors so incredibly sticky. You know the feeling, right? You tell yourself, okay, just one episode. And then suddenly you look at the clock and it's 2 in the morning and Netflix is asking if you're still there. Or you pick up your phone to check one quick email, and 45 minutes later, you kind of wake up from this rabbit hole of videos and posts. These little pockets of lost time might feel normal, but for some people, they're actually signs of a much bigger loss of control. So, when does a normal behavior cross the line into something that's a clinical issue? This definition right here is the key. A behavioral addiction isn't really about how much you do something, it's all about the relationship you have with it. The real hallmarks are, 1, that feeling that you just can't control the urge. 2, you keep doing it even when it's clearly messing with your job, your relationships, or your health. And 3, you've tried to stop or at least cut back and you just can't. And while we throw around the term internet addiction all the time, it's kind of this big umbrella term. It covers a whole range of very specific compulsions. We're talking about everything from online gaming and gambling to compulsive shopping to an obsessive need to just consume information. Some researchers even talk about communication addiction, which is that overwhelming need to be constantly plugged in through social media and messaging. Each one of these things plugs directly into our brain's natural desire for reward and social connection. All right, let's get into our first big myth. It is so easy to write these issues off as just a failure of self-discipline, a lack of willpower. But the clinical evidence, it paints a much, much more complicated picture. This isn't about being weak. It's about a very complex condition that's rooted deep in our brain's biology. And what's really wild is that right now, as we speak, thousands of clinicians all over the world are actively treating patients for these exact problems. But at the same time, the official diagnostic manuals, the rulebooks for psychiatry, are still playing catch-up. The scientific community is right in the middle of this big, important debate about how to classify these behaviors, which just goes to show you how new and complex this all is. And this brings us to this tale of two manuals. These are the two major guidebooks for mental health diagnoses. On one hand, you have the World Health Organization's ICD-11, which is used pretty much all over the world. It now officially includes compulsive sexual behavior disorder and gaming disorder. But on the other hand, you have the American Psychiatric Association's DSM-5, which is the main guide in the US. It doesn't yet have a formal diagnosis for general internet or sex addiction, but it has flagged internet gaming disorder as something that needs more research. This difference really shows you that science is a process, and we're watching it happen in real time. And the ICD-11 includes this incredibly important rule. For a doctor to make a diagnosis, the person's distress has to come from the behavior pattern itself, not just from feeling guilty or ashamed because of what society or their family thinks. This is crucial. It separates a real clinical problem from, say, a conflict with someone's moral beliefs. So what does this actually look like in the real world? Well, this data from a really important 2013 study gives us a peek. Now, this isn't to say these are hard and fast rules, but you can see some clear patterns. For the men in this particular study, the main issues revolved around online porn and gaming. For the women, the picture was pretty different. It was more about online shopping and using chat rooms for connection. It just shows how these compulsions can latch onto different interests and social pressures. And here's one of the trickiest parts about all of this. These behaviors almost never travel alone. They have a high rate of comorbidity, which is just a fancy way of saying they show up alongside other mental health conditions. Someone might be using the internet to escape from depression, or their ADHD might make the instant rewards from gaming extra appealing. And in some studies, this overlap is as high as 86%. This means that to treat someone effectively, you can't just look at the one behavior. You have to look at the whole person. Okay, this brings us to our second huge myth. And this is a big one. It's the idea that because there's no drug, no external substance you're putting in your body, it can't be a real addiction. Well, this is where the neuroscience gets absolutely fascinating. It shows us that certain behaviors can hijack the very same circuits in the brain that drugs do. This quote right here from the National Institute on Drug Abuse is a total game changer. It reframes the entire conversation. We're not talking about a behavioral problem or a moral failing. We are talking about a brain disorder. And when you start to think about it that way from a biological perspective, all of the compulsive, illogical actions suddenly start to make a whole lot more sense. So how does this hijacking actually work? Well, it all starts with a little chemical called dopamine. Things like winning a tough level in a video game, getting a bunch of likes on a post, or finding that perfect item online. These can flood our brain's reward system with a surge of dopamine. And we're talking a surge that is 2 to 10 times stronger than what we get from natural rewards, like eating a good meal or having a great conversation. Your brain just wasn't built to handle that kind of hit over and over again. Think of it like a 3-stage hostile takeover of your brain. First, the reward pathway, your brain's motivation engine, gets hijacked. The brain tries to protect itself from the dopamine flood by getting rid of its own dopamine receptors. What happens then? Normal life starts to feel kind of boring and gray. Only the addictive behavior feels good anymore. Second, the prefrontal cortex, your brain's CEO or its brake pedal, gets weaker. This is the part responsible for logic, impulse control, and thinking about consequences. It gets compromised. And third, the brain creates these powerful, conditioned cravings. The sight of your phone, a feeling of stress, even a certain time of day can become a trigger that sets off an overwhelming, almost automatic urge. And listen, this isn't just some abstract theory. Scientists can literally see these changes happening. Neuroimaging studies, using things like fMRIs, have found measurable physical differences in the brain. We're talking about gray matter deficits, as in an actual reduction in brain tissue, and messed up wiring in key areas like the prefrontal cortex. These are real physical changes to the brain's hardware. And if you want the perfect, real-world example of this dopamine connection, look at Parkinson's disease. Some patients are treated with drugs that boost their dopamine, and a known side effect for some of them is the sudden development of compulsive behaviors they never had before, like gambling, shopping, or hypersexuality. Then when the doctors adjust the dopamine medication, those compulsive behaviors often just fade away. It's a powerful, direct link between brain chemistry and these powerful urges. Okay, so after hearing all of that about hijacked pathways and gray matter deficits, it's really easy to feel a little hopeless, right? Which brings us to our third and maybe the most destructive myth of all, that this damage is permanent. But the most hopeful, incredible message from all of the science is that this is simply not true. Your brain is not carved in stone. It is designed to change, adapt, and heal. And the entire reason we can even talk about healing is because of this one amazing concept, neuroplasticity. This is the brain's incredible built-in ability to change its own structure and function based on what you do and experience. It's not static. The very same process that allows the brain to get wired for addiction is the process we can harness to unwire it and build new, healthier pathways. It can be rewired. And this healing isn't just a vague idea. It's a real biological process that happens on a predictable timeline. In the first couple of weeks, you have withdrawal. Let's be honest, this part can feel awful. Your brain's chemistry is all out of whack and trying to rebalance itself. But then, as you move into the next couple of months, you start to see real progress. The brain fog starts to lift as that prefrontal cortex, the CEO, literally starts using more energy and coming back online. And then, get this, after about a year, the changes are profound. We can see dopamine receptors increase by up to 20%. Which means normal things start to feel pleasurable again. And the prefrontal cortex, it actually gets thicker. That is your brain physically healing itself. So you see, recovery isn't just about gritting your teeth and resisting urges. It's an active process of rebuilding your own brain. Every single time you make a healthy choice, every therapy session, every single day you abstain, you are laying down new tracks, strengthening new connections, and taking a concrete step on a journey of real neurological healing. Okay, so that brings us to the big practical question. If the brain can be rewired, how do we actually do it? What does that path to recovery really look like? Well, it's not a single magic bullet, but a whole combination of tools, all designed to encourage that neuroplastic healing. The evidence shows it's really about having a whole toolkit, because addiction is a complicated problem. It's a mix of powerful therapies like CBT, mindfulness practices, sometimes medication, and this is so important, all the lifestyle stuff. Things like exercise, good nutrition, and getting quality sleep. These things create the right biological environment for your brain to do its healing work. One of the heavy hitters is a specialized therapy called CBTIA. It's a structured three-phase attack. Phase 1 is all about behavior, just getting the compulsive use under control with practical techniques. Phase 2 is about restructuring your thoughts, identifying and challenging those distorted ideas like, I can only relax if I'm gaming, or nobody would like the real me offline. And Phase 3 is about dealing with those other issues that are often hiding underneath, like depression or social anxiety. Mindfulness is so interesting because it takes a totally different approach. It doesn't try to get rid of the urges. Instead, it trains you to just notice them. You learn to see a craving pop up, observe it like a cloud passing in the sky, and then let it go without having to act on it. This creates this tiny crucial space between the impulse and the action, and that space is where you get your power back. It's how you break the cycle. Medication can also be a huge help. Now, these are often used off-label, which just means they were originally developed for something else, but doctors found they work here too. Naltrexone, for example, can kind of turn down the volume on the pleasurable hit you get from the behavior, which makes the impulse less powerful. And SSRIs, which are antidepressants, can help by either treating the underlying depression that's driving the behavior or by simply lowering the intensity of the compulsive thoughts. So, the big question: does all this stuff actually work? Well, let's just look at the numbers. This chart is from that study on CBTIA, and it's pretty stunning. It shows the average scores on an addiction questionnaire before and after just 12 weeks of therapy. Look at that drop. It goes from 4.63, which is solidly in the addicted range, all the way down to 2.41. That is a huge, life-changing improvement. And it's not just a temporary fix. Look at this quote from the same study. Over 95% of people were able to manage their symptoms by the end of the treatment. And even better, 78%, that's almost 4 out of 5 people, were still doing well 6 months later. This shows that these treatments give people skills that create real, lasting change. And really, at the end of the day, this whole thing is about so much more than just stopping one behavior. That's just the first step. The real goal, the prize, is to build a life that is genuinely healthy and satisfying. It's about finding joy in other things, repairing relationships, and finding a real sense of well-being. So, we end up back where we started, but now with a completely new lens. The science is clear. Our brains are incredibly malleable. That same neuroplasticity that can wire us for compulsion is the very same power that allows us to intentionally rewire ourselves for connection, for purpose, and for well-being. The path is definitely not easy, but it is neurologically possible. So the question isn't really if our brains can change, but how we choose to direct that change.